K-On! May be a show about a bunch of girls who form a high school rock band, but I also think it's somewhat misleading to describe it as a show about music, at least to new viewers. The girls really don't play or practice very often, and this even becomes a point of tension in the story, when Azusa starts to get frustrated because they're not taking their music very seriously. Instead, the band always seems to end up loafing around and drinking tea. I see K-On! More as a comedy about childhood and its freedom from responsibility. The girls don't have any sense of urgency about their music because they're still living in the limbo of high school, and their minds haven't started crafting concrete ambitions of greatness in the real world. They do want to be great in an abstract way because it seems like it could be cool, but they also still prioritize the whims of their childhood brains above all things. If you give them a choice between cake and guitar, there's a good chance they're picking cake every time. There are moments when they start to get more serious, but somehow the pendulum always swings back in the other direction, because K-On! Is ultimately focusing on a moment in a child's life when their values are still struggling to achieve a stable structure of commitment. The main goal of this video is to show you how these themes define the characters of K-On! I want to show you how the girls are transitioning from childhood to adulthood in this funny way where their personalities retain an unstable mix of both stages of life. I think that's a big part of their charm. The video is split into 5 chapters that focus on specific characters, and I've previously posted most of these chapters separately on my page as short-form content. So if you've seen one before, feel free to skip it, and you can also watch them in any order. It's tempting to think of Yui as a character who transforms in the first season of K-On! She begins her story as a girl who has no goals in life, no hobbies. She's absent-minded and irresponsible, and she mostly loafs around while her doting younger sister takes care of all her needs. But Yui also has this great speech at the end of the first season about how things have changed for her since she stumbled into the K-On! Music Club. She learned to play guitar, she plays every day, and through her dedication to the band, she accomplished her goal from the beginning of high school of finding a purpose in life. Or at least that's what Yui tells herself. But the funny thing about this speech is that it's undercut by a broader ironic context. Yui had forgotten to bring her guitar for the band's big end-of-the-year performance, and she had to race back home to retrieve it and even missed the band's first song in the process. And then while she's running back to school to at least catch the end of the concert, that's the point in time when she starts talking to herself about how much she's changed over the last couple of years. But this broader context shows us that Yui is in some ways the same as she ever was. The old, absent-minded, irresponsible Yui was precisely the kind of person who would leave her guitar at home on the day of the big concert. And there's also a longer story where Yui forgot the guitar because she mistakenly thought her sister had brought it to school for her, which is also a symptom of the way that her sister has always enabled her irresponsible behavior. But then at the same time, the show clearly wants us to overlook these signs of regression. We don't think any less of Yui for them. It's not as though she's been cured of her old self exactly, but that's because the old Yui never needed to be cured in the first place. It would actually be bad if Yui became a perfectly responsible, well-adjusted kid like her sister, because Yui's laid-back absent-mindedness is part of what we love about her. What Yui actually needs is friends who can elicit the potential that she already contains inside herself, while also preserving the impractical components of her personality that constitute her unique charm. The K-On! Music Club provides Yui with precisely that kind of support, and that's what enables her to give a speech about how much she's changed in the middle of a crisis which reminds us about the imperfect person that she's always been. If Yui somehow lost her friends in the K-On! Music Club, she probably would regress back to the aimless loafer that we met at the beginning of the series. She probably needs the ongoing daily pressure from her friends to stay committed to the guitar. But that really only shows us how precious friendship can be. True friends provide us with an environment where we can show up as different versions of ourselves, but without requiring that we snuff out the person that we become when we're alone in the privacy of our homes. There's a scene in K-On! Where Mio suddenly realizes that the band has domesticated Azusa like a cat. Azusa is their newest member and a year younger than everyone else, and when she first joins the band, she feels a little bit frustrated because the girls always seem to be goofing off together instead of practicing their music. The whole reason Azusa joined is because she marveled at the live performance that they put on for freshman reception, but on closer inspection, it seems like they're more committed to having tea than discipline or practice, and Azusa starts to question whether she really belongs in such a lackadaisical group. All the girls in the K-On! Music Club notice that Azusa is feeling discontented, but they cannot entirely agree on a strategy for placating her. Mio has always been the serious one, so she tries to force the other girls to get it together and give Azusa the practice that she wants. But Yui, Ritsu, and Mugi have a different idea about how to resolve this conflict. Whenever Azusa starts expressing her frustration, they intervene by feeding her a slice of cake, or giving her a little cuddle, or putting her in cat ears and making her answer yes and no questions with a little meow. Mio doesn't initially like what the girls are doing to Azusa because they're clearly not listening to her concerns, and instead they're doubling down on the source of the problem. But the thing is, every time the girls try to placate Azusa in this way, she always betrays a little look of satisfaction, even though she also tries to resist the secret pleasure that she derives from all of this attention, before putting up a wall and making some distance again to insist that they don't practice quite enough. And when Mio observed that the girls were domesticating Azusa like a cat, she was noticing that little look of satisfaction on Azusa's face, and the way that she secretly likes to be treated like a little baby, almost in despite of her own sense of self-seriousness. Azusa, for her part, was also confused by her own feelings during this period of domestication. She really was frustrated with the laziness of the K-On! Music Club, but then when she started exploring the possibility of finding another band to play with, she discovered that something was missing from all the other groups. The girls of K-On! May not be the best at what they do, but they also have a certain spark that Azusa doesn't find in other bands. Eventually, Azusa would realize that the very laziness of the K-On! Music Club is the secret of their charisma as a band. Anyone who watches them perform can see how much they love to play together, which is why Azusa couldn't take her eyes off them when she first caught their live performance, even though their lack of ambition also makes them rough around the edges. But the reason why the girls love to play together has everything to do with the way they spend their time together. The rule of the K-On! Music Club is that fun and friendship triumphs over everything, and whenever the girls find themselves feeding Azusa a piece of cake or domesticating her like a cat, what they're actually trying to do is to draw her into that world. They're letting her into the secret of their charisma. Azusa was always tempted to surrender herself to this world, but she initially tried to resist this instinct because she thought it would be bad for her music. But the reality was that she would never get to be a part of the performance that she so admired during the club's school show, unless she allows herself to be a little bit silly and to give up on the unrelenting seriousness of her ambitions. It was only when she realized this truth that she could finally give herself full permission to enjoy all the cake and tea and loafing around which formed the core of the band's time together. She could only allow herself to be treated like a little baby as she secretly wanted, when she realized that it would help the band rather than harm its prospects. I think that the K-On! Movie is a bittersweet story about a fundamental, unbridgeable distance between Azusa and the rest of the girls in the band. It's not that the other girls think any less warmly of Azusa, but this distance is nevertheless woven directly into their friendship due to the necessity of age. Azusa is an underclassman who joined a whole year after the band first formed, and so the rest of the girls naturally formed a creative nucleus without her. The significance of this nucleus becomes undeniable toward the end of the girls' senior year, as graduation approaches and Yui, Mio, Ritsu, and Mugi increasingly face the reality that they are leaving Azusa behind in high school, while they all attend college together. This is also the period of time when the K-On! Movie takes place. The very first scene of the movie symbolically establishes Azusa's separation as a central theme. Azusa enters the band's practice room one day after class, where she finds that the girls have already started playing without her. The girls are also arguing about a conflict that she cannot understand. The disagreement looks uncharacteristically intense. It will later turn out that the girls were simply playing a kind of prank on Azusa. They were pretending to act like their teacher's band, Death Devil, who seems to have constantly argued over artistic disagreements and threatened to end the band. And so really the girls were just putting on a playful show for Azusa. But that show will also initiate a pattern of behavior that holds throughout the K-On! Movie, where the rest of the girls always seem to be having a kind of secret dialogue with each other that Azusa does not get to participate in. Yui, Mio, Ritsu, and Mugi will spend the next 100 minutes secretly planning to give Azusa a goodbye present for the end of the school year. And in the end, they decide to write and perform a song for her, which is also about her, whose purpose is to communicate just how much Azusa's friendship has meant to them. But this goodbye present also further highlights Azusa's separation from the rest of the band. It's a performance by the band's core nucleus, from which Azusa has, in some important sense, been excluded. But then on the other hand, the lyrics of the song try to tell a slightly different story. They describe Azusa as an angel who changed the band, who is permanently part of the band, and they repeat over and over that high school graduation is not an end to what they've created together. However, the movie's final scene occurs right after the performance of this song comes to a close. And in this scene, we find Azusa separated from the band once again. Yui, Mio, Ritsu, and Mugi are all walking together on their way home, and they're trailing behind Azusa so that their discussion is out of earshot, and they all excitedly share their thoughts about what their performance must have meant to Azusa. This little moment perfectly captures what I had in mind a little bit earlier, when I described the K-On! Movie as a bittersweet story about Azusa's unbridgeable distance from the rest of the band. It's not so much that Azusa is an outsider to them, but she is permanently positioned outside the core nucleus of afternoon tea time. And yet the point of the K-On! Movie is to likewise insist that this distance is nevertheless a part of friendship. If Azusa does not live inside of the friendship nucleus, then perhaps she's more like the outer membrane of a cell which holds the nucleus in its embrace. The other girls may regularly separate themselves from their underclassmen, but when they do, they also do it for her sake and keep her in their thoughts, so as to communicate the way she always holds them together through the spirit of her friendship. Mio writes lyrics for the K-On! Music Club that are unapologetically girly and even a little bit childish in the way they use the imagery of marshmallows, stuffed animals, tea time, and school supplies to visualize the emotions of love and friendship. And of course, it seems perfectly natural that Mio should write in this way, because she is herself a high school girl whose everyday life is filled with this same kind of imagery. But I do think it's worth noting that Mio receives some pushback for the girliness of her music in episode 5, when she experiments with writing lyrics for the first time. The resistance comes from Ritsu and Miss Yamanaka, because they're the rock and roll purists of the cast, and Mio's lyrics clash with their idea of what rock music is supposed to sound like. Miss Yamanaka in particular has a history of writing her own songs with a certain affinity to death metal, and which constantly push the boundaries of social acceptability, so it's easy to see why Mio's sensibilities are inconsistent with her expectations. But despite this pushback, Mio never compromises on the girly cuteness of her lyrical instincts, and it eventually comes to define the band's identity. I think this moment establishes a broader theme about the music of K-On! The girls in this show all make music for their band as an extension and affirmation of their everyday lives as friends. They sing about the things they love to do together, which is to sit around after class talking about their lives over tea and admiring the cuteness of each other and their ideas. They sing, in other words, about the specific type of happiness that they share in common. I think this theme feeds into a comment that Mio once made to Azusa about the reason why it may be a good thing for the band to ditch practice as often as they do to goof around and have afternoon tea. That time that the girls spend together is the material of their music. It's what Mio likes to sing about. The band is, after all, quite literally called after-school tea time. But Mio's lyrics are the crucial element which established this identity for the band once and for all, which is why I regard her more or less as its spiritual leader. Ritsu has a momentary crisis in Season 2 of K-On!, where she feels that she can no longer play the drums. She had gotten her hands on some footage of the band's older performances, and upon watching it back, she realized that she had been deprived of the spotlight. All the other girls play their instruments at the front of the stage in full view of the audience, as the light shines upon their faces. But Ritsu is forced to sit in the back, hidden away in the shadows, as she wails away on her drums. If she gets any light at all, it's merely some kind of awkward accident that illuminates her forehead like an airplane runway. Ritsu is devastated by this realization. She takes a break from her drums, and she starts to experiment with other instruments in a desperate effort to claw back some attention for herself. We get a little bit of psychological context for Ritsu's crisis when we learn about her backstory as a drummer toward the end of the episode. Ritsu started drumming for reasons that were about as visual as they were musical. She saw a concert by The Who on DVD a few years back, and she was amazed at the wildness and largeness of the drummer's performance. That experience shaped her original fantasy as a musician. She wanted to play the drums in order to embody that same performative largeness. This is why Ritsu was so bummed out when she watched back the footage of her band's old performances and realized that she was hidden away in the shadows. She saw that she had failed to live up to her original drummer's fantasy. But then as she started experimenting with other instruments and spending ever longer periods of time away from her drums, she also realized that something had changed inside of her after the inception of this fantasy. She may not visually dazzle the audience in the way she once imagined, but she was starting to miss a different kind of satisfaction from her drums, which was the feeling of synchronization and togetherness that she achieved with her own band when she played. Ritsu realized that this feeling had become precious to her over the last 2 years, and none of the other instruments could replace it, because the drums had become like an extension of her personality. Ritsu could never express her wild and childish passion with the delicate techniques of the guitar. When Ritsu finally returned to her home amongst the drums, she would go on to share these feelings with her band. And the rest of the girls all felt relieved because they relied on Ritsu when they played. As Yui would explain, the girls all look to Ritsu to count them into every song with her sticks, and whenever they do so, they also seek out her overwhelming smile to power their own emotions. They all depend on her for synchronicity and spirit, even when the spotlight may not physically illuminate her face. It turns out that Ritsu has already achieved the original fantasy that she thought was lost when the shadows at the back of the stage swallowed her up out of view from the audience. Or rather, she found another version of it that was even better. Ritsu wanted to dazzle someone with her drums, but she now realized that she was already dazzling her closest friends. Indeed, the only reason that the band could shine at all is because Ritsu was already shining for her band and feeding them the energy that they required to play as one for the audience. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, consider leaving a like and subscribing to my page, or possibly hyping the video. I cover lots of other anime too, like in the links you see on your screen right now.